might think, well, that's being anthropomorphic to talk about animal emotions. No, it's neuroscience. And so saying animals don't have emotions is kind of stupid. Okay, what are some other indicators that animals have emotion? Prozac works on dogs. New things to animals are both scary and attractive. I call it the paradox of novelty. Now, there's some animals are higher fear, some animals are higher novelty seeking. Same thing with people. Oh, why do people do things like climb up Mount Everest? Because it's there. It's not something I want to do. You know, we have more behavior problems with dogs today than we ever had. When I was a child, all the dogs ran around loose. No behavior problems. A lot of the animal behavior software is really expensive. Security stuff's cheap. You can buy a really nice system for spying on animals and a software to go with it for a couple $1,000. You'll find things like mice that are doing somersaults at 3 o'clock in the morning. You want to understand an animal, you got to get away from language. Can't emphasize that enough. Well, we don't have somebody sleeping in the front row, do we? We don't allow that. Think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? I was shocked to find out that a lot of people get a very vague, generalized one. I just see specific ones. I can name off where they're at. And I find a few people where there's no picture at all. And then I ask them if they can drive, and they say yes. So I know they're not blind. And fear of falling, it's a primal fear. Your animal's going like this. I don't care if it's a horse or a dog or a cow. It's going like that. It's panicking. Okay, let's say the drug dealer brings in this pit bull. You want the drug dealer like 5 miles down the road. You don't want him in the lobby. You want him 5 miles down the road. See, all of my thinking is visual. My mind works like Google for images. HBO movie, Temple Grandin shows it absolutely beautifully. Oh, and it is on DVD, I've got to tell you that.
We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. We talk about animal emotions. And some people might think, well, that's being anthropomorphic to talk about animal emotions. No, it's neuroscience. One of the big problems we've got in science and in many, many disciplines is everybody stays in their own little stovepipe. You got the veterinarians that got their literature, animal ethology's got their literature, the psychologists have their literature, and nobody reads anybody else's literature. Well, the fact that animals have emotions, some of the first research done on this was done in the 60s. I can remember when I studied general psychology and we studied the rage cat. Stimulate the thalamus of a cat, and he starts hissing in a big rage. But back then they called it sham rage or fake rage. Well, why would it be fake rage? That doesn't make any sense. Because another one of these old experiments, and the Physiological Society is now putting a lot of this stuff online, showed that the cat's rage wasn't fake. They did a clever experiment to show that it wasn't fake. They gave it a stuffed rat, or they gave it a styrofoam block, a square block. It would attack a stuffed rat, but not a styrofoam block. You know, because a styrofoam block is an inanimate object. And even when the thalamus is being stimulated, it knew the difference. Okay, what are some other indicators that animals have emotion? Prozac works on dogs. In fact, dogs right now are being used by researchers as models for studying anxiety and OCD, obsessive-compulsive behavior. See, down in the base of the brain, you've got centers in the brain that drive emotions. These centers in the brain have all been mapped. And some of the research is being done by the National Institutes for Health to study why people get addicted to drugs. They're studying emotional centers in animals. And so to say that animals don't have emotions is kind of stupid. In fact, the one part of the brain that's probably the most the same is the lower centers down in here where those emotional drivers are located. And where we're most different from the animals is all this extra computer we've got up here on top. Neurotransmitters are the same. Now, Jack Panskep was one of the first neuroscientists to do a popular book on what he called the core emotional systems. You have fear. Fear circuits in animal brains, human brains have been mapped. If you stimulate the amygdala, the fear center, the animal gets scared. You stimulate that in people, sometimes it's done during epilepsy surgery, you get the same results. You have rage. Then you have another emotional system, separation anxiety. And it's separate from fear. In fact, you can breed animals that are high fear, low separation anxiety, and vice versa. You know, and that separation anxiety is dog is home alone, it's chewing the house all up. You know, and the mother and the baby are taken apart, and they get really upset. But then you got to have an emotional system to make an animal seek. to make it go out and do stuff. Otherwise, it would cower in a corner. Then you have mother-young nurturing behavior. And then, of course, you've got sex. And then you've got play. And interestingly, some research done by Berridge at the National Institutes of Health, he has discovered a system in the brain. It's a switch that actually switches back and forth between do we seek or do we have fear. And I was just on the plane reading this book, a Survivor Club, about how do you survive and things like, planes crashing and stuff like that. And something bad like that's happening, everybody's just kind of looking. That's the seeking mode. Or they can go into complete panic mode. And in the nucleus accumbens of the brain, it can either flip to seek or going into complete fear mode. I had a situation where I avoided an accident on the freeway that really demonstrated how that worked. Some idiot in a little low trailer passed me on the freeway, and a 2x6 board about this long slid off this trailer. And I locked onto it like radar. And it was like floating across the highway like this. And I moved the car over like this, and I slowed down, and I did a perfect straddle on the rumble strip. Managed to avoid a very serious accident. Wasn't scared at all. And then as soon as I had successfully not been killed by this board, the switch in the brain flipped, heart pounding, and every swear word you can imagine was coming out. And I am not going to say the swear words. Okay, you've all seen an animal orient. The deer looks. Okay, what do? Do I keep watching? Or am I going to go into fear mode, or I'm going to do something? And look at the ears of the deer. One is back there looking at the woods. The other ear is pointed at the photographer. Animals watch with their ears, especially animals like deer. Your grazing animals, prey species animals, always watching. Well, I did a little thing where I just put a clipboard out into a pen full of cattle, and they'll all come up and sniff the clipboard. That's novelty seeking. And then the wind would blow the paper, and then the cattle would run away. And it was like a switch. Well, back when I did this in 1998, I didn't know about the switch in the nucleus accumbens. That Berridge paper was just published just a couple of years ago. Now, the thing about new things to animals are both scary and attractive. I call it the paradox of novelty. If I put an umbrella out in the middle of a pasture, or I tie a bunch of flags to a fence, cattle and other animals will come up to that. But if I have a horse locked up in a stall and I open an umbrella up in its face where he can't get away, that's going to be scary. See, if you take novelty and just shove it in the animal's face so they can't get away, it's scary. But if they can voluntarily approach it, that thing that's scary in close quarters is attractive. They'll walk up to that same umbrella if I just put it out in the middle of a field. That's it's kind of the balance between fear and novelty seeking. Now, there's some animals are higher fear, some animals are higher novelty seeking. Same thing with people. Oh, why do people do things like climb up Mount Everest? Because it's there. It's not something I want to do. Or extreme sports. I like to watch extreme sports, but there's no way I would do it. Absolutely no way. Okay, sometimes you have a situation where an animal's doing a lot of abnormal behavior. Dog's chewed up his foot because he's home alone. That's driven by separation anxiety. This, the zoo cat there pacing all around, that's the seeking system. What does that animal do out in the wild? It walks a long way. It's a big seeker. Polar bears are the same way. Yesterday I was at the Detroit Zoo, and they were doing some really good environmental enrichment for the polar bears. The keepers throw fish in, and the polar bears dive for them. And then you can go down in this glass tunnel underneath and watch them dive for it. It's really cool. And that gets rid of the stereotypic behavior. What do dogs need? They need lots of companionship, people and other dogs, and they need lots of activities for seeking. We have more behavior problems with dogs today than we ever had. When I was a child, all the dogs ran around loose, no behavior problems. Nothing chewed up, nobody bitten, because they were all socialized. And now we've got tons of behavior problems. We don't have as many dogs hit by cars, but we've got zillions and zillions and zillions of behavior problems. Now, if you've got a behavior problem in an animal, you need to figure out which emotional system is driving that behavior. Okay, this is a very interesting experiment that was done with gerbils. And the gerbil was digging. You might have a gerbil at home in your kid's bedroom, and he's digging. So you go, okay, I'm going to give him more dirt. That doesn't satisfy him. The reason why he's digging is he wants cover. think about how this animal lives out in the wild. And this is where my visual thinking really helps me. See, all of my thinking is visual. My mind works like Google for images. The HBO movie, Temple of Grandin, shows it absolutely beautifully. There's a scene in there where a whole bunch of shoes come up in rapid succession. I have to kind of narrate a picture that's in my mind. Oh, and it is on DVD, I've got to tell you that. But what that gerbil wants is it wants a place to hide. So you give it something to get under, guess what? It stops digging. A hen wants to lay her egg in a private place, in a secluded place where she can look out and watch. Why does she do that? Because in the wild, if she didn't lay her egg in a secluded place, she'd get eaten by predators. Now, you can measure behavioral motivation. You can measure how much does a hen want a private place to lay an egg. And some very clever experiments were done by Ian Duncan up in the University of Guelph, and he made a doggy door, a little doggy door for a hen to push through. And he trains her to go through the doggy door to get something she wants. Then he puts weight on it. How much weight will she lift to get to a nest box? How long is she willing to stay off feed to have a private nest box? A real long time. So you can put hard numbers on motivation. And polar bear, that's the high-seeking animal, the nomad animal. Has a high-seeking drive. So throwing a fish in all different places all day gives him things to do. Now, the horse, on the other hand, is a high-fear animal. How do horses survive in the wild when they're living in the wild? They run from things, kick. But they're also got the eyes on the side of their head, and they're always vigilant, looking around, scanning the plains. And rapid movement tends to scare prey species animals like horses and cattle and deer. But rapid movement makes predators chase. You ever played with a laser pointer with a cat? It'll chase it all over the place. And so we got to be careful in working with training horses to not traumatize them. You know, people are getting away from rough training methods. I hate rough training methods. You know, some people will train a horse or a steer to lead by tie it up to a tree and just let it fight it out. Now, if you do that with a Holstein that's got a real low fear temperament, she'll pull back. It's not so bad. It's probably okay to do that to Holsteins. They just don't get that scared. But if you do that to a Solaire heifer, that's a real flighty kind of cattle, or an Arab mare, she pulls back and she doesn't habituate. She stays scared. There are differences in how stressed out they can get. Even in humans, you have this. You can either have a long or a short serotonin transporter chain. And people that have the long version of the serotonin transporter chain, you know, they get in a plane wreck. They don't get as stressed out about it as maybe someone with the short one. Now, I did some experiments back in the 80s. I always like to do stuff that other people haven't done before. Sometimes other people don't really appreciate that. And I was very interested in the research of Bill Greenau. And he found that when you put rats in an enriched environment where they have all kinds of old wood and junk to crawl on, they grow more little nerve endings in their visual cortex than rats living in a plastic shoebox in the lab. So I thought, let's try to use this as a welfare test, you know, for pigs that are in a commercial kind of barren big pig farm. So I said, let's look at the somatosensory cortex that goes with the snout. So I had pigs in just a regular little commercial pens, and I had litter mates over in Disneyland. Every day they got different toys. They got fresh straw every day. They loved fresh straw. Now, once they got the straw ripped up into pieces this long, they weren't interested in it anymore. And the hypothesis, going along with Bill Greenau's, all of his big, huge zillion dollars worth of grants, was that the pigs in the enriched environment would have more little branching in little nerve endings. Because what Bill's hypothesis was is complexity of environment makes little nerve endings grow. Guess what happened? My pigs in the barren environment had more nerve endings. And when I told my advisor that, he said, oh, shit. That was contrary to the hypothesis with zillions of dollars worth of grants. That's sometimes how science goes. So we repeated the experiment. This time we put video cameras in so we could find out what they were doing at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like if you're studying pain in animals, you've got to put video cameras in there that you can look at remotely. And a lot of the animal behavior software is really expensive. Security stuff's cheap. You can buy a really nice system for spying on animals and the software to go with it for a couple $1,000s. You just go to a security company. And you'll find things like mice that are doing somersaults at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're not doing that during the day when anybody's around. Well, in the middle of the night when no one is around, my pigs were grinding their noses into the floor. This was the barren environment pigs. They were grinding their noses into the water and grinding their noses into each other. It was use, not complexity. So this brings up the whole idea of bad neuron growth in the brain, where the dendritic growth was bad. Well, I went against a whole lot of grants, and I found 2 papers that supported my hypothesis. One was where they made a cat lift up its paw. He called that paper a piece of shit. I'm not kidding, those were the exact words. And another paper I found was a bad study, and it never really got it published right. Went against a bit too many grants. But now it's known in neuroscience that, things that you use in the brain get strengthened. That's the old Hebb synapse theory. And, when I was a little kid and I was autistic, I used to like to sit and rock and do stereotypies. Well, if I'd been allowed to do that, I wouldn't be here now, because I think you could just build a dendrite highway where I'm not supposed to have one. When I was a little kid, loud sounds hurt my ears. A lot of animals have very, very sensitive hearing. They can hear high frequencies that we can't hear. And then we're keeping them in environments that might be way, way, way too noisy. And when I was a little kid, the environment was sort of like living in a boiler factory or in the middle of, a bunch of freight trains, going by. And that hurt my ears. And I found that I could just sit and dribble sand through my hands and I could shut out the world. Well, that's kind of what my pigs were doing when they're grinding their noses into the floor. And it's like taking a drug. When you're doing stereotypies, you sort of drug yourself. Well, I wasn't allowed to do that. I had a lot of very good early intervention, and I would be dribbling sand through my hands, and then I'd get to studying every little grain of sand like a scientist studying it under the microscope. Now, another thing, working with animals and some individuals with autism and some other disorders, is it's sensory-based, not word-based. You want to understand an animal, you got to get away from language. Can't emphasize that enough. Thinking pictures, sound, touch, smell. Shut your eyes. What does something feel like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it look like? And I didn't know when I was a lot younger that other people didn't think the same way I think. Until I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, in the mid-'90s. Well, we don't have somebody sleeping in the front row, do we? I don't allow that. I know, I get tired. Been there, done that. I've fallen asleep in meetings. Somebody criticized one of our presidents for falling asleep over in Europe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Been there, done that during a ethology meeting one time. Fell asleep in the back. I know what it's like. But, you always assume that your thinking is like everybody else's thinking. And then I started questioning other people about how they think. And I got some really surprising kind of revelations. And this is a question that I asked. And I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm going to explain to you why I asked this question the way I did. Think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? I was shocked to find out that a lot of people get a very vague, generalized one. I just see specific ones. I can name off where they're at. Now, why did I pick a church steeple? Because if I said house or car, most people can see their own house or car. I wanted to pick something that's out there in the environment, and everybody sees them. Also, just about everybody knows what they are. Ask your cell phone tower, you might not know what those look like. But that was really shocking. That a lot of people, it's much more vague. And I find a few people where there's no picture at all. And then I ask them if they can drive, and they say yes, so I know they're not blind. And they're an auditory thinker. I have found in autism that there's kind of 3 kinds of specialist minds. There's a photorealistic visual thinker like me. Think Google for pictures. Often can't do algebra. Another kind of mind is the pattern thinker. Kind of a more abstract visual thinker. Think origami. Think chess. Think organic chemistry molecules, patterns. A lot of these kids have problems with things like writing composition. And then you can get word thinkers. You can get auditory thinkers. You can get mixtures of different kinds of thinking. You know, visual thinking is a continuum. Somebody asked me yesterday if I could be made into a word thinker. Well, I'm like here on this end of the continuum of visual thinking. And this person without visual thinking is here. Well, if I work on it, maybe I can get to here. But I'm not going to take this person and bring them to here. You know, or if you're in the middle where most people are, yeah, you can, okay, I want you to, just think about those church steeples. Let's say you came up with a generalized one. Just start thinking about the specific ones. Now, that generalized steeple, that's an association cortex, in the visual cortex. And the one where you're thinking about the specific ones, that's primary visual cortex. And I had tensor imaging done on my brain. I have a huge internet cable goes all the way back into primary visual cortex. The control doesn't go back that far. I think in pictures. It's literally having movies inside your head. I've had teachers say to me, how do I get rid of the movies in the kid's head? Well, you can't. That's how he thinks. Now, there's some evidence that even in so-called normal people, language covers up things like mathematics, things like thinking in pictures. There's a type of Alzheimer's where the language parts of the brain get wrecked, the frontal cortex gets wrecked, and this artwork here came out of a patient that had no previous interest in art. There's also been some research that was done with Van Gogh's Starry Night. Now we got all the swirly things up in the sky, and some mathematicians got a hold of that and said it matched a statistical pattern of water turbulence. Well, I don't think Van Gogh was thinking about mathematics when he painted Starry Night, but he put mathematical patterns in it. Now, in some of my earliest work with animals, I'd get down in the chute and see what they're seeing. And in the early 70s, this was looked at like I was a nut. And this brings up the whole thing of, when you want to be a pioneer, the rest of the scientific world's going to think you're crazy. When Margulis, mentioned that the mitochondria at one time were free-living organisms, that was looked at as crazy. That's now known to be fact. And I go, okay, I'm down in the chute, the cattle going down this chute. Look at the shadows there. I can see people. If it's cloudy, you don't have the shadows. You got a chain hanging down. And they're afraid of a chain hanging down. And I always get asked, do they know they're going to get slaughtered? And I found that they behaved exactly the same way at the slaughterhouse as they do in this vaccinating chute. They knew they were going to get slaughtered. They should have been jumping out. And the slaughter plant I went to only had a fence that was this high. And believe you me, Arizona striped Brahma cattle, they could have jumped over that fence, just hopped over it, but they didn't. Here's an animal coming out of a chute. See how he's looking right at that streak of light? Eyes and ears looking right at it. Watch where they're looking. In dogs and cats, the ears work together. That's because it's a predator. But in your grazing animals, horses and deer and cattle, the ears work independently. Watch your ear radar. Watch things like if the whites of the eyes show. You see the whites of the eyes, your animal's getting fearful and scared. In cattle and horses, tail switching if there's no flies, that's anxiety. Dogs, tail wagging, that's good. Unless it's really stiff and just the tip's going, that's not so good. When the whole butt's going like this, then they're really, really, really happy. But when cattle start to lash their tail like a cat, watch out. You're going to get kicked. Same thing with horses. I have been giving talks for 35 years on cattle handling. Why do I still have to keep showing a slide of chain hanging down in a chute? People don't take them out. It's like they don't see it. I have to make verbal checklists for all these things. I have a book on humane livestock handling. I have a whole list of all the things they need to look for to get out of the facilities. Watch your ear radar. Horse and the cow have got, the zebra and the horse have an ear on each other. Look at the other ear on me. Now, when they get really upset or scared, they just put them straight back. But when they're just sort of watching, just watch, they're looking at. This horse was deathly afraid of black cowboy hats because during a veterinary procedure, somebody threw alcohol in his eyes. And the person who did that was wearing a black hat. Now, notice a white cowboy hat has no effect. You see, the thing is, remember, animal thinking is sensory-based. A white hat's a different picture than a black hat. I put the hat down on the ground, and when I put the hat on the ground, it wasn't as scary. But then as the hat got closer and closer, I started bringing it up like this to my head. The more scary it got. And there was no way I could have been that distance from the horse and had that hat on my head. I just got it to my waist, and the horse wanted to start rearing. You see, as it got to be closer and closer to a match. Common things like a horse might be afraid of a guy with beards, guy has a beard, or somebody that wears a white jacket. They'll make an association with something they were seeing or hearing right at the moment the bad thing happened. There was an elephant at a zoo that was deathly afraid of diesel-powered equipment. If it had a diesel engine, he was scared to death of it. If it had a gas engine, it was okay. Somebody probably worked him over with a backhoe or something. And so, had a diesel engine, that was a real bad thing. But a dog might get afraid of the place where he got hit by a car. Because this is where the association cortex of the animal is a little bit limited. We would know that the car is the thing that did it. Here are some examples of specific fear memories. Now the thing is, in working with training animals, we got to make sure we prevent fear memories. They're very difficult to get rid of. And the more high fear the animal is genetically, the more difficult it is to eliminate the fear memory. Because the problem is, you can train the brain to shut the file, but you can't erase it. Now there's some research showing maybe it can be erased if you give them propranolol, which is an old-fashioned blood pressure medicine that is being used now by the Army, research on post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, you can also have touch memories. If you took two different kinds of horse bits, imagine one that's jointed and one that's straight, and I held them in my hands and shut my eyes, they would feel different. A jointed bit would feel different than a one-piece bit. And if a horse has been abused with a jointed bit, any jointed bit, he's going to go berserk. But if I get rid of a jointed bit and use a one-piece, where it's all solid, one piece, then not jointed, he'll be fine with that. You see, this is where you get out of the fear memory file. There's some research that shows animal brains actually set up file folders. There's a paper in Science where a monkey was looking at kind of a computerized image of a dog, like a brass dog sculpture it looked like, and it would gradually morph into a cat. And as it gradually morphed into a cat, the monkey would press the switch, dog, 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 then all of a sudden switch to cat. You had a cat file folder and a dog file folder. In human beings, they found a neuron in some guy's brain during epilepsy surgery that responded to Bill Clinton, and another neuron that would respond to some movie actress. That even in the human brain, you can get specific pictures. Dogs recognize the voice of the good person and the bad person. We did a lot of work at the Denver Zoo on training antelopes to cooperate with the veterinary procedures. So they would voluntarily cooperate with the blood test and not get all scared. One thing that we learned is the bad veterinarian that had shot him with a dart gun, he couldn't work with the trained animals. You could bring anybody in off the street, but the guy that had been the dart gun man, he couldn't get near him. It's very important for an animal that first experiences with new things be good first experiences. If the first time that horse goes on the horse trail or he falls on his butt, he's likely to be afraid of horse trailers. And a really common bad thing that horses do in horse trailers is when you open the door, they back out like a rocket. That's a horse that has bashed his head exiting, and he backs out like a rocket because if he thinks if he backs out fast, he can get out for the bad trailer like knocks him on the head. I see someone nodding their head there. The more flighty an animal is, the more gradually you have to introduce them to new things, more gradually and carefully. This is just some cortisol levels where there were no painful procedures done like dehorning, but beef cattle rough handling, deer netted. I've had wildlife biologists say, well, that deer can't be that stressed. We held it down for only 30 seconds. I said, yeah, but if you went out there and somebody knocked you down and took your wallet, you'd be really, really stressed over that. Then you can see down there for cattle sleeping, and then our trained antelope. Our trained antelope had almost baseline levels of stress hormone because they weren't getting scared. See, this brings up another principle. When an animal voluntarily does something, it's really important, voluntarily cooperates, you don't get all the fear. Okay, up there on the top of the graph there, the rough handling, that's fear stress. It's just fear stress. No painful procedures were done other than taking a blood sample, and that's not really very painful. This is fear stress, and fear can be a really powerful stressor. And You know, the thing that's interesting when you look at the literature is in the neuroscience literature, they will use that little 4-letter F word, fear. But when you get over into the agricultural literature, in the veterinary literature, a lot of people didn't want to call it that. You know, but the circuits have been mapped. You know, some people don't want to admit that when they're handling these cattle, they are just making them, scaring them half to death. This just shows our antelopes and how we trained them. And these animals are very specific in their thinking. Our trained animals, you could have strange people handle them, but one day the roofers came in, fixed the barn roof, and they panicked and cracked up on the fence. See, people on the barn roof is different than people in the barn and people out in front of the exhibit. You see, it's a different picture. See, even ants can store a graphics file. There's a paper called Multiple Stored Views. And when ants go out and forage, you know, they follow the pheromone trail. But they also take some snapshots along the way. And then when they come back home, they turn back and they're looking for a match on landmarks. And people say, well, how do you know an animal's a sensory-based thinker? Well, in neuroscience, we know visual stuff is stored in the visual parts of the brain, motor memories are in the motor part, auditory in the auditory part. Well, if they don't have verbal language, there's no other way they could possibly store information. Has to be sensory-based. Now, this is an interesting picture that a young autistic man drew for me. He's showing how there's little boxes in his head. This gets back to the file folders. How do I form a concept when I think in specific pictures? I don't think in generalized things. I think specifics. It's bottom-up thinking. It's bottom-up. Most people think top-down. The normal human mind, it tends to overgeneralize. My concept of a cat or a dog is based on a whole bunch of pictures put in this file or in that file. And when I was a real little kid, I differentiated a dog from a cat by size. Then our next-door neighbor's got a dachshund. And I tried to figure out why Rosie the dachshund was not a cat. So I had to find a visual feature that she had that none of the cats had. Every dog, no matter how tiny, has the same nose. It's sensory-based. That's a visual similarity for categorization. Or I could use sound, barking or meowing. I could use smell. Dogs and cats smell differently. Man on a horse, man on the ground. In the mind of the horse, that's two different things. In the mind of cattle, it's two different things. You can have a situation where a rider's abused a horse. You can do everything on the ground. Veterinary work, shoeing, but you can't ride him. He's bucking and going crazy when you ride him. Or you can have a horse where they're fine for riding, like if you adopt a Mustang. They last time had a lot of bad stuff with people on the ground, so you can ride them just fine, but shoeing and veterinary work's like horrible, and just getting the tack-on's horrible. And then cattle that are just handled by horses, they might be very tame when you're on a horse, 2-foot flight zone. Then you try to move in and out of a pen with a person on the ground. Now they got a 50-foot flight zone, they run over the person, really dangerous. But you see a man on a horse and a man on the ground, that's two totally different things. It's a different picture. So you've got to think specific. I find in solving behavior problems, both with children with autism and with animals, people don't think specific enough. They'll say, my dog is nuts. The kid has behavior issues in the classroom. What's a behavior issue in the classroom? Does he giggle inappropriately, or did he haul off and hit the teacher? Is he throwing spitballs? You know, how I might work with those things is going to be different. Giggling in a classroom, I'm going to handle that in a different way than hitting a teacher. I find I have to ask, get more and more specific information. Normal mind drops out detail. Brain scan research that actually shows that. It was done by Nancy Minju. She took people with autism, put them in a brain scanner and a functional MRI, and had them read out of a book. And just the part of the brain that goes with the words is lit up. Then they take Asperger, that's like a real mild, and you get the syntax and the words lit up. You put the normal person in there, guess what? The detail of the words disappears. You know, I think one of the big problems we have in a lot of policy things today, it's getting more and more abstractified. People are getting totally separated from how that policy is going to work down on the ground. On the leash, off the leash. In the mind of the dog, that's two different categories. When I'm on the leash, I protect my owner and I fight other dogs, and when I'm off the leash, I can go play with them. That's a very, very common thing that dogs do. Now, let's just look at things like you're going to the veterinarian. Give your animal a non-slip floor. Bring a bath mat in with a rubber backing on it so the animal's not slipping. Fear of falling, it's a primal fear, and your animal's going like this. I don't care if it's a horse or dog or cow. It's going like that. It's panicking. Jerky motion scares, both seeing it and feeling it. Steady motion. Also, there's an optimal pressure to hold an animal. You've got to hold it just tight enough so it feels held, but not so tight that it hurts. The mistake that people make is to squeeze them to it more and more and more when they panic. Oh, yesterday when I was at the zoo, I got to go behind the scenes at the penguin exhibit, and they picked up one of these little penguins about this high, and they held it around the middle, and then she supported its feet. So it felt completely supported because she said, if I don't put my hand underneath their feet, then they panic. You see, that gets back to the fear of falling. We've got to prevent the fear of falling. A calm animal is easier to handle. Once an animal gets all scared, it takes 20 or 30 minutes for it to calm down. Let's not get it all excited. If the horse throws a fit in the veterinary clinic, let's give it half an hour to calm down. Should an owner be present during a veterinary procedure? Let's get back to how that animal emotionally perceives the situation. If the animal's scared, some little poodle, and the owner's there calming it down, then the owner should be there. Okay, let's say the drug dealer brings in this pit bull. You want that drug dealer like 5 miles down the road. You don't want him in the lobby. You want him 5 miles down the road. Because in that situation, the dog may try to protect the owner against the veterinarian. But let's say the police bring in their German Shepherd dog, that's police dog. Should the policeman need to be there? It's going to depend upon how he's trained. And if he's trained that when he's got the Kong toy, strange people can handle you, then the policeman should be there. Otherwise, he shouldn't be there. That's why you've got to look at motivation. How is the dog actually perceiving this? Does he feel he's got to protect the owner? Or is the owner there to calm down fear? This just shows a squeeze chute holding cattle for vaccinations. And, you want to squeeze on both sides so they don't get off balance. Now, one of my big frustrations in working with slaughter plants, some people in the industry call them harvest facilities. I think that's BS. I use the slaughter word. Even in Hollywood, you use the slaughter word. And one of the things I found at one of these great, big, huge, fancy press conferences was, people are just curious about what's going on. And, how does feed yards work and stuff like that. Now, when I first started out in my career, I thought I could fix everything with engineering. In the 70s, I could just build the perfect system. Now I found I can only fix half of it with engineering. Because the other half's management. Good equipment's really important, but I got to have management to go with it. And I have found that 20% of people can be good stock people. But there's other people I can train. And I have to constantly supervise to keep bad, rough practices from slowly slipping back. And then there's some people that just shouldn't be handling with animals. And so the big thing I've been working on with the industry now is measuring animal handling. I can measure things like how many fall down. If you're a big slaughter plant and you want to pass the McDonald's audit, more than 1% of the cattle or the pigs fall down during handling, you fail the audit period. How many are squealing and mooing? How many are running? How many run into stuff? How many you use the electric prod on? This is stuff I can measure. And then I can tell, am I getting better or am I getting worse? You manage stuff that you measure. Well, this was baseline data that I took originally. Well, the places that were bad, 22% of the cattle were vocalizing. Horrible. And the plants with good handling, it was only 4.5%. Past the McDonald's audit, it's got to be down to 3%. You see, I collect the baseline data, I see what's the worst, and I see what's good. I knew that they could get down to 3%. Yeah, and then people handle cattle rough, you're going to have a lot more bruises. Well, one of the things I found is you got to make people pay for bruises. One of the biggest ways that you can make change in so many things is through pressure from retailers, large buyers. You want to get rid of sweatshops and things like that? Well, then you got to get the companies that buy the stuff to inspect the factories. I was horrified to read about some of the computer factories. People were jumping off the roof and killing themselves at computer factories. Well, we've got some computer companies here that need to get control of their supply chain management and find out what they're doing to their employees. Good equipment. This just shows some of my curved facilities. You might wonder, why make it curved? Cattle have a natural tendency to go back to where they came from. So you're just working with the behavior. But I found simple things, like putting a light on the entrance of a chute. Then they'd walk right into the slaughter plant. I didn't have the light there, they wouldn't walk in. Here's a very simple thing. I taped the light up over the entrance of the chute in this pig slaughter plant, and I went from 38% of the pigs having to be electrically prodded down to 4%. Now, of course, this is with well-trained people that only used it when the pigs refused to go. Inventing new equipment, I found, was a whole lot easier than teaching people how to use it. The thing that I have found all the years I've been working is people want the thing more than they want the management. They want the magic drug, the magic program. Oh, we're going to put internet in the schools, and that's going to make schools wonderful. Well, it didn't make schools wonderful. It's nice to have internet in the schools, but it doesn't replace good teaching. One of my big concerns right now in many things is we're lacking people, young people coming in and doing stuff out in the field. People who get interested in animal issues, they want to become lawyers. They're interested in environment, they want to become lawyers, sue everything. We got to figure out how to fix stuff. One thing I'm very concerned now in this country is we've gotten away from doing stuff. I'm a child of the 50s. We built the interstate highway system. We went to the moon. Republicans and Democrats, they both did good stuff like that. We need to get back to doing real things. How do we actually fix environmental problems? You can sue stuff, but then, okay, McDonald's had the power to kick plants off the approved supplier list, but then my job was to fix the plants. And out of 75% plants, I fixed most of them with simple things. Lighting, non-slip flooring, and covering up things where they could see people and vehicles going by and conveyors moving and things like that. And then there's totally new stuff that needs to be invented to deal with energy problems. We need people to figure out how to actually do stuff. I gave a talk at Pace University. A lot of their students go into finance. I said, we got to get back to doing stuff. I read an appalling thing in a business magazine. You know what venture capital is? Venture capital is when investors, give a big grant of money to a startup, some little startup company like Google, and then that turns into something really big, or they give it to lots of different kinds of companies, give startup money to startup tech companies. Well, when venture capital makes less profit than all of this derivatives and credit default nonsense, which I call casino gambling banking, we shouldn't even be doing it, that's really bad. We need to be getting back to the kind of things like that, how about figuring out ways to solve energy problems? Venture capital needs to be going into those kind of things. That's doing stuff. I always like to show my drawings off. Because when I was younger, people really thought I was weird. And the way I sold myself to people was I sold my work. I'd show off my work. That's how I sold jobs. Because I was really weird. Movies showed me in the 60s and 70s and I was really weird before I started taking antidepressants. Does an animal actually think? Marion Stamp Dawkins defines thinking as solving a problem under new conditions. It's not simple associative learning, operant or classical conditioning. It's also not a hardwired instinctual behavior. Like birds when they mate, he struts around with his tail feathers up and she wiggles her butt and they kind of do a little dance, all hardwired, motivated by sex. That doesn't require thinking. If you rub a mare that has a foal right around the udder, she'll groom her baby, she'll also groom a gate. That's obviously not thinking. And simple associative learning doesn't really require thinking. But here's a situation where animal actually solved a problem. This crow figured out how to bend a little hook and make a little tool to snag a little bucket. This is a Nicola Clayton. She's the Blue Jays, getting mixed up. Nicola Clayton's the Blue Jays. But this is solving a problem under new conditions. And here are the jays. This is Nicola Clayton's work. And a jay knows when another jay's watching, when he's hiding his worm trees. Waits until another jay turns away, and then he'll hide it in a different compartment. But if it's a family member that's watching it, he lets family members watch. It's okay for family to rip off your worms, but not strangers. One of my really big concerns, I'm getting near the end of my talk now, is what I call overloading the animal's biological system. We push a dairy cow to milk and milk and milk. We push chickens to make more and more meat, and they get leg problems. We're breeding dogs for all kinds of stupid appearance traits. Now poodles are getting gut torsion. You got bulldogs that can barely walk. They can't breathe. They can't have their babies naturally. Talk about bad becoming normal. Okay, you push the dairy cow too hard, they get lame, they get too skinny, they only last for 2 years of milking. You can get dogs with neurological problems. Everybody thinks it's really pretty to have white, blue-eyed dogs. Put 2 of those together, you're going to get deafness and other kinds of really bad problems. And what happened to those pigs' ears? Another pig ate them. When the industry went to the lean line pigs, they accidentally bred a pig that was meaner and more excitable. Now, nobody deliberately wanted to breed an aggressive pig, but sometimes traits are linked. And they bred a more excitable, lean and mean pig. And I was one of the first people to notice this, because I was going to the plants, and I'd see pigs from many, many different places. See, the people that bred these pigs only looked at their own pigs. I was looking at everybody's pigs. So I saw the difference. And they'd say to me, well, you're not a geneticist. And I said, I got one qualification. I look at more pigs in more different places than you ever looked at. Yeah, traits are linked. Yeah, those are really pretty, but you overselect for a single trait, you're going to wreck your animal. I want to talk about the work that Belyaev did. You see how the wild fox, he's like long and slender, pointy nose. Well, the Russians wanted a tame fur fox that wouldn't bite your head off. So they bred for a tame fur fox that would lick you rather than bite you. And they ended up with a border collie fox dog. I mean, who would have dreamed a fox would turn into a border collie? That's basically kind of what happened. Traits are linked. I'm also really concerned that a lot of pets, like dogs, are not getting enough socialization. It's very important to socialize puppies to toddlers. They got to learn that this little person is a person, or you can get into very dangerous prey drive stuff, where this is prey, and if this big, then it's a person. You've got to get them socialized to toddlers, socialized to other dogs. The leash laws we got in Fort Collins, there's a lot of work having a dog. Take it out and let it socialize off leash with other dogs. Animals reared alone often viciously fight other animals. I've seen that in dogs, I've seen it in cattle, and one of the most dangerous animals in the farmyard is the dairy bull. He's hand-reared, and when he gets to be sexually mature, he thinks he's a person. It's a mistaken identity issue. So then he views the people that raised him as a rival for mates and attacks. It's not a tameness issue, it's mistaken identity. Now, if you take the bull and you rear him on a cows, and they're all tame cows, you can pet them all you want, but he knows he's bovine and he's going to leave you alone. It's mistaken identity. Now, dogs, on the other hand, we've bred a really, really special animal in the dog. A really social animal that pays attention to where we're looking, pays attention to us more socially than a wolf does. Now we can become their leader. We can become part of the society, but the grazing animals, we just got to be the benevolent power. There are some of my books, and hopefully we got some time for some questions, because I always like to have some good discussion. I'm going to pick somebody. Okay, right there. Well, that's the problem. Problem you got with a feral cat is you've missed the socialization period. Cats have a rather narrow window. If you don't pet the kittens when they're very young, and also don't pat, stroke them, stroke them. Well, maybe what happened, the other people had chased him around, and he realized you were safe. You see, this is an example of, the animal thinking. Let's say that an animal's just instinct, and an animal is just, simple associative learning like operant conditioning. Yes, operant conditioning stuff's important, but an animal can, that's an example of thinking. You know, he realized that you were safe, and so he went to you. And then when it comes to the emotions, okay, let's look at where animals are similar and where animals are different. The emotional drivers in the base of the brain, they're just about the same. The difference the person is they're filtering those emotions through such a big, complicated computer up here that you can get a complexity of emotion. You know, animal emotions tend to be simpler. Now a dog can be growling one minute and he's wagging his tail the next minute. People hold grudges. And what do I think about using a llama for a pack animal? I don't have any problem with using an animal for a pack animal as long as you don't overload it. You don't let it get sores. Okay, you get into things like horse racing. I've got a lot of problems with pushing horses to where bones are snapping, lungs are bleeding, you know, because they're genetically breeding for run, and then starting them too early. I have a lot of problems with biological system overload, and that's what that is. But I don't have a problem with racing a horse as long as you don't. At the zoo, one of the things I found there, you've got to. We don't want to let lions just, you know, kill live things. So then you got to give them other stuff to do, like you take a box of meat and put it on a cable and do giant cat toys. Tigers really like that. And then they kill a box of meat. You know, and you can move it all around and make it kind of hard for them to get it. You know, what you got to look at is, you know, what emotional system would be driving a behavior. Yeah, you overload it, you make it too tired, you're mean to them, you know, hitting them and yelling at them. Yelling at animals is very stressful, especially animals like llamas and cattle. Screaming at them is very stressful, and they differentiate between the person screaming at them and just equipment noise. And that's screaming. And this is research done by Joe Stuckey up in Canada. And what Stuckey found was that screaming at cattle made the heart rate go up more than just equipment and gates slamming. That animal knows that that screaming is directed at them. There's been a lot of stockmanship research done by Paul Hemsworth, and he has found that animals that are afraid of people give less milk, sows have less piglets, pigs gain less weight. Animals that are afraid of people are not as productive. You know, I feel our relationship with animals has got to be symbiotic. We've got to give them a decent life. I don't know her name, Mrs. Nyman from Nyman Ranch. She says, you got to give them a life worth living. I really like that. I've got to make sure she's the one that came up with that. Elephants, chimps, dolphins. I kind of, you know, as you go up in nervous system complexity, I mean, my background's trained in biology. Oyster welfare and scallop welfare, I don't think I'm going to have to worry about that. There's not enough nervous system to worry about. But as the nervous system gets more complex, there's some cephalopods that have got a big brain. And the brain gets more and more complex. I think the ethical things get more and more, we got to be more careful what we do. But when it comes to pain, all birds and mammals feel pain. And pain's nasty, even if you got a small brain like a chicken. And the ultimate gold standard experiment for determining that an animal feels pain is what's called a self-medication experiment. This has been done by Colpert, and one was done by the chicken, other one was done in a rat. And they artificially caused arthritis. They injected some really bad stuff into the joints that really messed up the joint. And then the rats had a water bottle with fentanyl, very fast-acting painkiller, tastes bitter and really awful, plain water bottle. And as the leg heals, when the leg's all sore, they drink the nasty tasting stuff. Then as the leg heals, they switch to the plain water. Chickens, it was done with feed dishes, with the same thing. And so birds and mammals will definitely self-medicate, definitely feel pain. And there's no question about that. Now, when it gets into things like boredom and some of these kinds of things, chickens are a lot easier to enrich than dolphins would be. They're a more intelligent animal. The other thing is you get into a sensory world, a sensory emotional world. You know, animals, you know, maybe we'll say, well, the animals aren't really social, but even cattle. Sisters graze together, moms and daughters graze together. Any rancher that starts using sequentially numbered ear tags will tell you, yeah, they come back through the chute in the same order the next year. Okay, right here. Okay, first of all, on autism, we got to start looking at age groups. Little kids, 2, 3, and 4, You've got to get at least 20, 25 hours a week of one-to-one teaching with an effective teacher that gets them talking, gets them interacting. Now as a little kid, you know, manners were pounded in. You got to get these kids doing stuff. There are some kids with sensory problems are so bad they'll never tolerate a big supermarket. You know, then you got to be more careful about the sensory stuff. Other kids, you keep taking them in the supermarket, they'll, you know, gradually habituate. You know, then when you get into the, you see, then when you get on the older ones, at one end of the spectrum, you got all the people that make Silicon Valley run. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody that's very, you know, going to be nonverbal and have to live in a supervised living situation. I'm seeing too many smart kids going down a handicap route because their abilities weren't developed. You know, my ability in art, that was really encouraged when I was a little kid. You know, I just had somebody call me, they wanted to get some of my childhood artwork, and unfortunately, I only moved 3 times. Things get thrown out. But you got to take the thing he's good at. A lot of these kids get fixated on something like airplanes or trains. Teach reading with trains. Teach math with airplanes or trains. You know, if all he wants to do is draw pictures of airplanes, well, let's have him draw different airports, different places the plane goes. So you get an association back to his favorite thing, airplanes. Have you read Thinking in Pictures? Okay. I have another book called The Way I See It, too, you might find helpful. Okay, right here. If you're designing an animal shelter, you better spend some time there. Let me tell you something else that I'm finding with computer-aided design. I've been in the industry with the meat plants for 35 years, so I watched the meat plant engineering departments go from hand drafting to CAD drafting on the computer. And the old fogies, when they switched over, everything was fine. But I'm seeing young kids come in that have never built anything, they've never used their hands to build anything, they've never drawn by hand, make weird mistakes on drawings. They don't know where the center of a circle is. They'll put a 25-foot gate in a stockyard and not even realize it. They're not seeing their drawings right. You know, little babies learn to see by touching stuff. And if someone's going to be designing an animal shelter, I think absolutely need to go to an animal shelter. This is one of the things I think is a big problem, is things are getting too abstract. If you're going to design a hospital, don't just go to one hospital, go to a whole bunch of them. Talk to the people that, you know, that are using the operating room, and, you know, and get the ideas of, get those people involved. What I find with the hands-on people, like at a hospital or maybe at a feed yard, they're very good on incremental changes. Now, when it comes to something totally different, the last time I was, it'll never work. A lot of times we'll do that. And if they just say, it will never work, I don't pay any attention to that. I got to drill into them and say, now, you got to tell me why it won't work. Don't just tell me it won't work, but why. You know, and get into the detail. Well, you want to see something stupid, if you go on United Airlines and find one of their old shuttle planes, Shuttle by United, you get the world's dumbest galleys on those planes. They hate them. They ripped out perfectly good galleys with drink carts and replaced them with this idiotic dresser drawers because they were going to be like Southwest Airlines and give out drinks on the little cocktail tray. Southwest just does water, Coke, and Sprite. United does all these different drinks. They don't even have a place in there to put ice. They have to put it in multiple bags. Now, whoever designed that, at great expense, these things cost a fortune. I've never, ever served drinks on an airplane. If they want to do it like Southwest, maybe somebody should have gone on a bunch of Southwest flights. I'm appalled how people don't do their homework on these things. When I've done a lot of work with the various restaurant companies on their animal welfare auditing, and they'll never go to the competitor's restaurant. I call that market research. Maybe I ought to go to a competitor's restaurant and see what they're doing. People, but that Shuttle by United, that's, you want to see a dumb airline galley, that's it. Every time I look at that, thinking, ugh. And they, well, I would recommend that, see, I'll tell you let me give you a few little hints. Don't face the dog cages towards each other. That makes dogs bark when you do that. One of the biggest problems in animal shelter, and we did a paper on this, is noise. And the problem is that materials that absorb noise are hard to clean. Another thing that will cut down the barking, I tell them have volunteers come in every day and take every dog out for an hour of play and really good time every day, and then they won't get so stressed out and bark so much. But don't face the dogs head to head like this. That's one tip. That's really important. Well, design of lecture halls. Actually, most lecture halls I've seen have been they're usually fairly well designed. I mean, I've lectured in all kinds of places. Then you get into, well, should it even be a lecture format? You see, then you get into that. Whether it should be, and of course that's the way I've been doing things. Maybe it's the wrong way to do stuff. One thing, I do some interesting things in my design class. I have my students actually design cattle handling facilities. And I'm finding there's some big differences in the drawing skills. And I'm finding after teaching this class for 20 years that some of the kids today are having more trouble with the drawings than they did 20 years ago because they're not doing things with their hands. I'm having students coming into my class, they've never drawn a circle with a compass. They don't even know what it is. I had one girl go out and buy a Boy Scout compass. But the thing that's a problem is working with hands-on things like when we were kids building tree houses and things like that, trying to figure out how to put up an army tent, you learn problem-solving skills. And too many, my class, there's quite a few different ways you can lay out the facility and it can be right. And then I lay out all the good drawings so they can see there's like 5 or 6 different ways to lay it out. And it's not just a total cookbook. You have to follow certain rules. And then I do an internet project where they've got to pick out a subject in animal behavior. And it has to be a scientific subject, not a political one. And I make them go to, like 3 or 4 different scientific databases and find journal articles. Because the thing I want to teach them is you got to go past the first page of hits. Like, for example, if you're looking up cattle or something with cattle, you've got to use all your keywords. Cow, steer, calf, bull. You've got a bunch of different words. They don't dig into the literature enough. So I have a web surfing thing. And what I'm finding on that is half the students think it's a baby assignment, and the other half it's really a great assignment. I've had a lot of discussions in our animal science department about, with other faculty that have been there for a long time, like I have. And the kind of consensus of opinion is your A student's just as good as it ever was. But the student that used to be a really nice, solid B student, B+ student, they've slipped. And one of the things I'm seeing with some of these smart Asperger kids, I'm seeing some of these smart kids getting so addicted to video games, we can't get them to do anything else. You see, if I had gotten addicted to video games when I was in high school, I wouldn't have been out doing things with horses and cattle. There are some kids that can learn to program games. But for every kid that's programmer material, there's 10 others that are not programmer material. I would have definitely been one that's not programmer material. I think one of the things is, an autistic person thinks in detail. See, my thinking's bottom up. It's like you take the puzzle pieces, you put them together to form the whole. And you see, the normal human mind tends to drop out detail. Now, when we were living out in the bush, we never got very far away from the detail. But now we got policymakers and stuff getting so far away from the, you might say, nitty-gritty on the ground, that policy gets made as more and more people that are interested in different issues want to go the lawyer route. You're not figuring out how do we actually fix things. You see, I'm more of an engineering mentality, and the engineering mentality is I want to fix stuff. Okay, we flunked some plants in the McDonald's audit. How do I fix them without spending a lot of money? Most of them I could fix. There's some energy things that we're not going to fix with simple things. There's probably some radically new technology that needs to be developed. Well, that's the frustration. I've had people, you said I see things other people don't see. People say, well, how does Temple Grandin know that? Well, it's like I'm piecing together all the pictures. Like this whole BP thing. Okay, let's look at that issue, the oil well. You have 2 issues here. Deep water drilling and whether or not you should do it. That's one issue. We're not even going to discuss that. The other issue is what kind of screwed up stuff went on this rig. I've worked on construction for 20 years. I read all the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. They dug up all the dirt. The 60-minute interview with the guy that told about how there was broken gasket from the blowout preventer coming up the well. Showed it to the bosses. They should have shut it down right then and there. They were cutting corners, pushing, taking safety devices off. I've been on those kind of bad jobs. Now the consequences of my jobs weren't serious as oil well, but I know exactly what went on that. But I'm like getting different pictures of different things. They were using equipment they knew was broken. That's called negligence. Yeah, the most critical piece of equipment in the whole world, the blowout preventer, had about 3 broken things on it, and they knew it. Well, that's kind of an interesting question. Some people probably couldn't hear it, but you were talking about, first of all, people, lots are more in the present. Yes, I am more in the present. Visual thinking is a continuum, too, because some people, I've questioned a lot of people, everything they think about, they see specific. Then you get some people where they see the generalized steeple, but then I can pin them down and they'll start to see specific. Then there's some where I can't get them off the generalized one. And then there's some where it's just 2 lines like that. And that's all it is, just 2 lines. That generalized steeple has like varying degrees of detail as you move along the continuum. But you see, just now talking about the oil well, I'm seeing the guy now interviewed on 60 Minutes. I'm seeing what I imagine broken gasket to look like coming up out of the well. He didn't have a picture of that, but I know what the drill platform looks like, and I know how big around the thing is. And I'm imagining sort of what these things would have looked like that he would have had in his hand that he would have taken. Oh, boss, look what came up out of the well. You see, and now, based on my construction experience, I'm now back in the construction trailer with a really bad project that I was on that I won't name, where they did all these bad things. And I'm now imagining the guy I saw in 60 Minutes walking into the shipping container building they use for an office and saying, hey, boss, this is what came up out of the well. The blowout preventer's broken. And they said, keep going. You see, and I'm reconstructing a picture. I know basically what an oil rig looks like. I know what the living quarters look like on it. And then I may have the reconstructed wrong what the gasket looks like. Well, you see, yeah, because what I'm saying, you see, my pictures don't come up like, Google when you go on that, you have like all these pictures on the screen all at once. No, mine come up like this. And then if I hold a picture, the still picture can turn it into a video if I hold it. Now, there's a lot of designers, and I've interviewed a lot of designers in the meat industry, that when they look at a set of drawings for a plant, for a layout for a whole plant, they can make a still picture in their mind of the equipment, but they can't run it. I can actually run the equipment. You see, that's a more extreme visual thinking. Now, if I ask them about a scene from a movie, they can replay a scene from a movie, but they can't draw a drawing for a new plant and turn on the equipment. They can see it just stationary. I've had some long, long conversations about 3 or 4 of my designer friends, and because I'm really interested sort of in how people think. And it is a continuum. People are mixtures of different kinds of thinking, and then there's some things in verbal like I now have kind of tape recorded downloads. But it's if you think very verbally, things tend to get very abstract and ideological lots of times. And a lot of ideology gets totally emotion-driven. And they're not thinking about, okay, let's take an issue like healthcare, for example. I'm seeing hideous pictures in my mind of a guy pulling his tooth out with the pliers because he couldn't to go to a dentist. I read about that in the newspaper. So now I'm visualizing it, and it's like really hideous. I'm seeing a Ford truck driver that was being interviewed on a TV show. They couldn't get medical care. Like a girl that broke her foot and couldn't afford to go to the doctor, and I'm going, well, how do we get medical care to the hotel maid that's she's got really bad arthritis, or I'm thinking very specific things. I'm going back to that book Nickeled and Dimed. That's a book that made an impression on me. Well, I think horses I don't like horses cooped up in stalls all the time. Let them get out and get horses. Let them get out and socialize. Now, if you have a horse that's been reared alone all its life, he may not get along with other horses because he's never learned whether when he becomes dominant or he doesn't. When you become dominant or you're subordinate, you just stay. You don't keep fighting. He doesn't know to stop fighting. So some animals that have been reared alone, they'll almost never socialize. They kill other animals. I've seen that happen with dogs, and sometimes the only way to get that stopped is to have an older, very well socialized, slightly bigger animal sort of knock it around a bit and put some sense into it. You know, and if you do have to keep a horse cooped up all the time, you got to be taking them out and riding them. You got to do stuff with them. And you shouldn't just be feeding them pellets. Give them a lot of long hay to eat. Don't give them something gobbles up in 5 minutes. Horses are designed to graze for hours and hours a day. Well, that's good. We've got to get creative on some of these things. You know, I think there's things that we can do that we can make a better environment. I don't want to see, there's two things I don't want to see. I don't want to see stereotypic behavior, repetitive behavior, and I don't want to see any self-injury of any kind. Those are two things that are absolutely not okay. Marine animals, I haven't done any work with marine mammals. I've read a lot about them. I saw a demonstration one time where a dolphin was trained to get a stomach tube put down it for traits. You know, now the whole thing with a killer whale that killed that keeper. Now that particular whale, I found out some things about that. He wasn't used to people being in the water with him. And I think he was treating her almost like a toy. You know, where another time at SeaWorld, some teenage boys got in there and they were riding Kaiko all night. And he was just fine with that. You see, this gets back on he was used to having people in the water. You know, the USDA is saying, oh, nobody should get in the water with them. Well, it's going to depend upon the whale. That particular whale, no, you don't want to get in the water with him. He's going to treat you like a toy and drown you. And then another guy got in the water with him in the middle of the night, and he ripped off his testicles. So, you know, this is where you've got to look at what went on with the handling history. And then the whale, a Free Willy whale, and they let him loose. He went into a cove, and they found kids to play with, and there'd be like 50 kids crawling all over him, and he wasn't eating any kids. You see, a lot of it is how an animal's brought up, especially a really intelligent animal like that. You learn what's food, what's not food, what's a toy, what's not. And the thing is, person up on the cement platform and in the water, that's two different file folders. And then she had this giant, big, long braid that probably resembled some other toys they had. She had a braid about that long. Okay, well, horses and dogs. Some autistic kids really respond well to horseback riding therapy. I've had parents say they did their first words on a horse. So you've got rhythm and you've got balancing. Those are two things that in OT is seen to have a good effect on the brain. And then you've got the relationship with the animal. Some kids, a service dog's the best thing you can do. Other kids don't like dogs because they're afraid it's going to bark and hurt their ears or it smells bad. You know, so you have a situation where for one autistic kid, a service dog is the best thing you can do. For another kid, it would not be a good idea. Okay. Well, let's look. The question was, okay, they're teaching to the test in the school. Well, really creative teachers can still get good grades on the test. Let's do write about interesting things. Work mathematics into different science experiments and different hands-on things that you do. I mean, even in art and painting, there's chemistry and making paint, and you can work those things into it. It makes it more real. But I'm very concerned about all the hands-on stuff being taken out of the schools. If I hadn't had art and sewing when I was in elementary school, I don't know what I would have done with myself. You know, because that was making stuff. But I think that taking hands-on things we lose a lot of problem-solving skills. And then things tend to get more into, it gets back to the old thing, we're not doing stuff anymore. Okay, right up there's green shirt. He predicted the World Cup results was probably just chance. I mean, octopuses, some of the cephalopods can learn by observation. They can figure out things like unscrewing a jar. But the World Cup thing, is probably just some random thing. I mean, you can pick out, there's an old thing about picking out stocks on the stock market. So you take the Wall Street Journal stock page, you put it up on the wall, and you throw darts at it. And usually you get just about as good a portfolio as you do with a professional. Okay, right here. Okay, Okay, the emotional systems in the brain, if you look at it anatomically, the emotional parts of the brain, that's the parts are the same. But okay, an animal does not do higher mathematics and figure out how to fly to the moon.
No, but emotions, so guilt, for example.
Well, that's complexity of emotion. You see, when you take, down in the base of the brain, you got fear, rage, separation, anxiety, and seeking, and then you've also got mother, young, nurturing, sex, and play. Now you filter these things through a big, complicated cortex. You can get all kinds of complicated mixtures of emotions because you're filtering. You've got those same drivers. I mean, down here in you look at the anatomy down there, it's the same, the pig as it is in a person. But then when you look at the cortex, you look at the top of the brain. So you're going through and then the whole frontal cortex, you've got, this whole area of the brain here. Frontal cortex is a gigantic association cortex. What frontal cortex does is it associates everything in the brain with everything else. We have an association cortex that's, 20 times bigger than the animal's got. And then you get a complexity of emotion because you're putting it through the frontal cortex is associating with everything else. And then we can still do stuff. A beaver can build a dam, but one of the things that animals, they can have culture. But one thing that really makes technology advance is being able to write stuff down. Then the next generation can build on that knowledge. You write stuff down. Animal doesn't have any way of, they can like the elephants have a matriarch that she lives for 70 years, remembers stuff, but they can't write it down. Think about how much knowledge is in the library, just the library at school, or how much knowledge is on the internet. There's no way one brain could even store all that knowledge. We have an ability to store knowledge that no animal has got. But when you look at, and I coming from like a biological background, you look at brains. I mean, they're on a continuum. Like you take stuff like pain. The chicken will self-medicate. Now, one of the differences as I had a friend that had a dog and the spay job broke and her innards came out. And the dog wasn't very concerned about it. She was looking at it and like, ooh, what's this? Now, of course, the human owner, she was horrified. And I lived out on a ranch and, it's midnight on a Friday night, no way to get the vet. They were ranchers, so they stuffed it back in and sewed it up with string and shot her full of antibiotics, full of cattle antibiotics. And the dog lived. Well, let's say your guts fell out. You would know how much trouble you're in a way that the dog doesn't. You'd know that if your guts fell out, that's life-threatening. Where this dog started going, ooh, what's this stuff? Coming out of here. When I got into puberty, I had horrible anxiety attacks, and the movie showed me before I went on antidepressant medication, and it was like being in a constant state of stage fright all the time. And exercise helped it. Now I'm taking antidepressants, and that really calmed it down. But that anxiety was just absolutely awful. And I noticed cattle, when they went in the squeeze chute, they kind of relaxed. And I showed the picture of the squeeze chute. I can go back to that slide. I don't know how fast I can go back on this computer without giving it a nervous breakdown. Put that, but I'll watch just put that picture up here. Yeah. I just watched the cattle going into a thing like this, and I noticed some of the cattle, when you put them in there, they just kind of relaxed. So I built a thing I could get into that put pressure over wide parts of my body. And a lot of people find that really calming. Deep pressure on wide parts of the body are calming. And it's calming for about 20 minutes. Wouldn't be calming if you stayed in there all day. Okay, let me just repeat that question. When did people start paying attention to what I had to say? Selling the equipment was easy. I was selling equipment right from the start. But getting people to operate it correctly, that was hard. I was so frustrated, people would beat cattle up right in state-of-the-art facilities. There's certain things that I've had a really hard time selling. Another one is sensory problems in autism. Problems with touch sensitivity, sound sensitivity, visual sensitivity. Some people can see flicker of fluorescent lights. A lot of people have a really hard time. They don't want to accept that. I think it's difficult, if your sensory system's normal, to imagine this alternate reality where sound hurts the ears like a dentist drill, or the dog would have a problem with too much high-pitched noise. The sensory issues, that's been a really hard sell. There's certain things where it's an easy sell, certain equipment things. Selling the equipment, actually that was easy. Right from the beginning, I was selling the equipment. But then those cowboys put that metal plate in there, and that killed the cattle. And the movie didn't show the taking it out, and then it did work. They didn't end up wrecking it. But selling the thing is easier than selling the management and getting people, to not be rough with cattle and other animals. I think gradually, attitudes are changing. But there's certain principles that are hard to sell. Like, I've been preaching for years that people on the autism spectrum for antidepressant medication have to have very, very low doses. Now, the really good doctors know, but the other doctors just follow the verbal recipe, and the PDR says, well, you're supposed to have 20 milligrams of Prozac and bump it up to 40. They're going to do that no matter what. Then when the kid goes berserk from an overdose of Prozac, they put them on tranquilizers to treat a Prozac overdose when they ought to be cutting the dose. People on the spectrum need a much lower dose. I've preached that for 25 years. Why is that a hard sell? That's been a very, very hard sell. And I've had hundreds and hundreds of parents come to me and tell me about, they did great on a low dose and they doubled it, and it was the worst thing that ever happened. That seems like such a simple thing. But I think it's sort of like, okay, the cookbook says do this. You see, and for most people, the cookbook works. But for people on the spectrum, you get a little dab of Prozac and be the best thing for people like me. I'm taking a very, very low starter dose of an antidepressant, and I've been on the same dose for 30 years. I don't dare stop taking it. Why is that difficult? There seem to be certain things that are difficult sells. The other thing that's a difficult sell is good stockmanship. Paul Hemsworth has maybe 35 or 40 papers on animals being afraid of humans and how that messes up productivity. Why isn't the world beating the door down for his stuff? Well, they'll buy all kinds of equipment, but they won't do the management to do the stockmanship. See, one of the things about the good stockmanship is tons of details. People want to go buy the magic new milking parlor and, the super-duper computerized automatic takeoffs. That's going to solve all the problems. Yes, it's nice to have good equipment. I'd much rather have the good equipment than some old crappy one. But you've also got to have the management to go with it. Some of the worst abusive animals I've ever seen has been in state-of-the-art facilities because they simply weren't doing the management. There's things, it seems like things involving a lot of details. Like the thing with the medication, you see, you got to very carefully tailor the dose, which means you have to do a lot of questioning and a lot of talking to the parents. Well, you could just put it on a sheet and also have it online that what's the sign of an overdose of SSRIs? Can't sleep, and they feel like they drank 10,000 cups of coffee. And then you cut the dose back. It's that simple. One size doesn't fit all. It's hard for I don't know why that's, to me, I don't know why that's difficult to understand. And I'm really beginning to think that it does have something to do with different ways that people think. The stockmanship's a hard sell, the sensory issues are a hard sell, and the low-dose principle, and like, try one drug at a time and find out what it does first. You see, when I think about these things, I'm thinking about it in a very visually detailed way. I'm not just saying, oh, well, you just throw it at it. All right, one more question. All right, we'll take you right over there. Well, saying, well, rodents don't need anything, then why are mice doing weird stereotypy somersaults at 3 o'clock in the morning? You know why they're doing it? You've got to give them places to hide. And so if you give them, like, they have these things called nestlets that just were sort of like those things you wipe makeup off with. and they would dig and dig and dig in these things, but they weren't very satisfactory because they couldn't like get it fluffed up enough to make a place to hide. You got to give mice something to hide in. Well, you have to look at what you have. Let's go back. Let's visualize what does it do in its natural environment. Now I'm seeing the rabbits that live in the parking lot at the Denver airport. And they know where all the, people throw the French fries and things out of the cars. And one of the things that a lot of these animals, they want a place to hide. Rabbits eat a lot of vegetation. Interestingly enough, as far as lab animals go, mice do tons of stereotypies and rats don't. But mice are much more high-strung. You see, there are genetic differences in animals and how well they'd adapt to a barren environment. You have an animal that's really calm and laid back, he lays around and sleeps all day, and then you got another animal that's doing all kinds of stereotypies. There's genetic differences. But I think one of the things that will help you is, what is that behavior like in the wild? Like that gerbil, think about a gerbil. I'm now seeing the desert in Arizona. And a gerbil's out there running out there among the cactus and sagebrush, and there's hawks flying around. Well, if I was a little gerbil and I didn't find a place to hide, I'd be pretty upset. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it with that, and thank you all for coming.